Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I take the dog out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good evening, listeners. It's Friday evening, August 16th, question mark. It's a little bit windy, so I'm using my high-tech cover the microphone strategy, so apologies if the sound is a little weird. What beautiful weather. The sun is just going down in the west. I can see it kind of over the trees, and it's doing that thing where it lights up the clouds, illuminates them in a halo of beautiful light. Makes for an excellent view of an evening. There's quite a few neighbors out for strolls, including some dogs, so I'm going to have an interesting time trying to keep my dog from getting all entangled with other canines. It's an end of a long week, and I've got about 2 more weeks till classes start, so I'm gearing up to be at the end of my summer recording season and moving into the fall recording sessions, so we'll see. I guess I'm sort of laying the groundwork for the possibility that there may be a minor interruption in the schedule as I figure out when I can record episodes. Lots of cicadas out tonight. Holy cow, listen to that. Wow. So I had a couple things I wanted to talk about. First, I wanted to give a brief location scouting report. I took a trip over the last couple days to Bowling Green, Ohio. Actually, I went for 1 day. I drove down Thursday and came back Friday for work. But while I was there, I managed to pop into 2 different game stores. One of them in Bowling Green itself, the other on the outskirts of Toledo. It looked like there are 3 gaming stores that Google easily found in Toledo itself, but I didn't have time to go to those. So just the 2 that I visited, but I thought I would give a little bit of a quick insight into those stores in case you're in the area and you're looking for a place to go. The shop in Bowling Green is a small shop in the downtown area called the Stacked Deck. It looks like the Stacked Deck is probably mostly your local spot to pick up Magic cards. It's a very small store. They had like 2 tables, which they had just gotten. Apparently they had just done a big purchase of Magic cards, so they were sorting them. So there wasn't a lot of table space available, but even if they had put all those away, there wouldn't have been much. In terms of selection, it was mostly a Magic shop, by which I mean where they sell Magic cards, not implements for doing illusions. And they did have a few games there, maybe a dozen titles. Some interesting stuff that was not very common, like they had the game based on the PBS Mystery Series by Bruce Glasgow, and they had 2 different Game of Thrones games. They had the Fantasy Flight Game of Thrones game, which is sort of like Diplomacy or something. But then they also had another Game of Thrones game that was in a similar size box. So they had an unusual selection for a store of that size, but not really much. They also had a bunch of old role-playing books, which is more unusual and interesting, and a lot of science fiction magazines for decent price. But overall, not probably worth going out of your way to visit. At least it wasn't for me. And then the other shop I went to was on the south side of Toledo. It was called Frogtown Hobbies. And had I finished with my work earlier in the evening, I probably would have popped over there for games. It was about 20 minutes from my hotel. But I didn't finish till after 8, and it was only open till 10. So I figured even if they did have a regular game night, it was decent odds I'd get there and there wouldn't be any games for me to get into. So I did not go. But Frogtown Hobbies is a huge store, probably ranking pretty high in terms of stores for size. Certainly none of the stores around here have that much floor space, in my experience. I guess maybe Dice Dojo in downtown Chicago, which has a whole gaming room. I guess you could probably say Dice Dojo probably has that much room. But so Frogtown, and they definitely carry a lot of the CCG stuff. They have a big selection of Magic. It looks like the kind of store where they have a really robust Friday night Magic turnout. They did have a much better selection of games, but overall it was a lot of sort of gaming mainstays. They had Machikoro and all the expansions. They had Catan and all the expansions. They had, Betrayal at House on the Hill and Small World and all the expansions. And it was all very nicely arranged, but not really designed for, I guess, this sounds super snotty, but not really designed for a board game enthusiast of my level, where they're going to have like the new hotness, or they're going to have games that are hard to find. Most of the games they had there were tried and true, good sellers, the kind of stuff where somebody who's been playing a Magic a lot, they say, I'd like to try something else. You can point them to one of these games and they're sure winners. The employees were very nice, and they had a really good sale going on Dead Fantasy Flight LCG stuff. So they had a bunch of Netrunner data packs for 50% off, and they had a bunch of Star Wars card game stuff. So that was good if I was in the mood for that. And I guess I could have bought, it looked like a full collection of Doomtown Reloaded, but overall, not all that satisfying either. Good selection of small box card games though. Some stuff I hadn't seen much of or hadn't seen before. I considered getting Flip City. That had gotten some good reviews, but also gotten some mediocre and poor reviews, so I passed on that. So overall, interesting trip. I always like going into local game stores, and if you're in the area, especially if you're looking for a game to play and you're on a night when they have games at Frogtown Hobbies, I'm sure that would be a great place to go. But just in terms of overall shopping, neither of those really did much for me in terms of the kinds of games that I'd be looking for. So that's my report from the Bowling Green area game stores. I thought today I would spend a bit of time talking about Gloomhaven. I asked in a couple episodes ago whether I ought to do a message from the deep Gloomhaven, and I heard back from one person who said yes, I should. Shout out to Chris, a regular at Toggle Gaming, and somebody who's been posting in the Pick Up and Deliver forum on BoardGameGeek, or the Guild. You should pop over there and join him. 3269. It would be great to have a bit more conversation there. I'll try to think of interesting discussion questions. So he said he would like to hear my thoughts on Gloomhaven in a message from the deep segment. So I figured this is as good a time as any. In thinking about how to talk about Gloomhaven in a message from the deep segment, it seemed like there were a couple different things to consider. The first of which being, how far in do I need to get before I can claim message from the deep status? Usually I won't do one of these until I have quite a few plays under my belt, at least 5, which is quite a few for me, enough that I feel like I have a good sense of how the game works, and I can give some more elaborate feedback that comes with having played a game a few times, to the point where you're comfortable with the rules and that sort of thing. And certainly I meet that qualification for Gloomhaven. I believe we're at 17 or 18 plays now in my group since January, when we started playing. At the same time, another way to think about it, like if I were doing a message from the deep about Pandemic Legacy, would be maybe you should have finished the story to do the conversation, because you can't really comment on the overall arc of the narrative until you've gone through the whole campaign. And by that measure, I'm a long way from being done. I think I've measured a couple times. If I had to guess, I'd say we're maybe 15%. We're maybe 15% of the way through the campaign, which is not very much when you think about a long arc of a game. I mean, it means we have a lot to go in Gloomhaven. We've only opened one character beyond the initial 4 that you get to start with. In fact, we haven't even opened all the ones you get to start with, because we only used 3 of them to begin. But we've only opened 1 new character. So I guess what I'm saying is I have a little bit of imposter syndrome here about my right or my ability to give a solid analysis or solid discussion of what's going on in Gloomhaven. Nonetheless, I charge ahead. I sometimes like to joke that one of the skills you pick up as a PhD in English is the ability and confidence to talk, or the ability to talk confidently about things that you've only read about and never read yourself. And maybe that's where I get the chutzpah to talk about Gloomhaven without having finished it. Nonetheless, I have 4 qualities of the game that I want to call out as being particularly interesting. If you're somebody who's been, watching the Gloomhaven hype and trying to decide whether you want to put that money down or not, Hopefully this will help give a different insight into it. For those of you, this is your first Message from the Deep episode. I generally try to stay away from reviews, but in Message from the Deep episodes and Shooting from the Hip episodes, I will often comment on elements of the game I like or don't like, which I guess is sort of review-esque. Ooh, review-like? Ooh, I don't like the suffix "esque" in this context, but so that's kind of the approach I'm taking. So it's sort of like a review without a judgment. Or another way to look at it is I'm never going to do a Message from the Deep for a game I don't like, because I generally won't play them enough to get that message out there. Nonetheless, for those of you who've never played Gloomhaven and somehow are listening to my podcast but don't know what it is, a quick summary. Gloomhaven is a dungeon crawl game with a long-term story element where, as you play through the game, the decisions you make affect the story elements that you encounter. Each game session involves a scenario, most of which involve your characters going into a forest or a dungeon or a cave and fighting bad guys. Occasionally you have some other motive other than fighting, a thing you have to do, but usually killing all the bad guys is the win condition. The game is played in a really interesting way. You have a series of cardboard tiles that represent the spaces that you're in, and you follow the instructions in the scenario to set up the tiles and seed the monsters into the board where you're gonna play. Then you have your characters, and each character has its own deck of action cards. And before the scenario, each player selects a preset number of cards to bring into the scenario. And for each character, you have more cards than you are allowed to bring. And as you level the character up, you get to select more cards from a reserve to add into your active pool. And then when you're building your hand, you have more choices about what to bring. So you might have, like for instance, I'm playing one of the starter characters as a Craighheart. Apologies are going to be minor spoilers here, not major ones, but I want to give you a sense of the way the game works. So I have several cards that let me move in varying amounts, and I have a couple cards that let me pick up treasure easily, and I have a lot of cards that do damage in different ways. So depending on the scenario that we're playing, I will take more or fewer of those movement cards, and I may or may not bring that treasure card with, because I only have the one card that makes it easy to pick up treasure. I usually don't even bring it because I just can't make that part of my motive. The Craighheart is allowed to bring 11 cards into the scenario, and I believe at this point my character is level 5, and I have something in the neighborhood of 17 or 18 cards in my pool. So I have to pick about 6 cards that I'm not going to bring with me in each scenario, which makes for a nice little strategic start. Now, as the game goes along, you're able to, you buy these perks and you buy advantages, different things that allow you to make your character better. The other thing that determines how well your character does when you take your actions is you have a deck that sort of stands in for the dice you would roll in another role-playing game. And as you turn things over, it adds or subtracts from your attack value. And so as the game goes on, you're able to hone that deck and make it better for your character. The last thing I'll say about gameplay before we start is the game is very tactical and cooperative in a really interesting way. So every card that you have has 2 things on it can do, or it can be generic. So any card can give you 2 attack or 2 movement, or you can use it for its top attack or its top action or its bottom action. The cards are divided into 2. In each round, you choose 2 cards to play, and then when it's your turn, you have to choose the top action off one card and the bottom action off the other. Or you can use the generic actions of move or fight, or you're actually allowed to just waste a card if you want. But you always have to play 2, and you can't ever use the top of both or the bottom of both. You have to split it, which makes for really interesting decisions to be made. And it also means that while random luck does come into play, you can have your attack fail, for instance, there's a lot more room for you to be able to succeed in your attack or to have your tactics pay off. The game works especially well when you combine your tactics with strategies used by other players, such that, like for instance, my character has several powers that charge up or use the green magic. I'm not even going to explain that. But I also can occasionally use the wind magic. So sometimes one of my teammates will be able to charge up or use the green magic or the wind magic. And so by communicating with one another about which magic we're going to charge up or use, we can sort of amplify the effect we're doing. You also sometimes can heal the people around you, or if you're not, like my character has several cards that will hurt the people around me if I'm not careful, so we have to do a little communicating about that. So the long and short of it is, Gloomhaven is a tactical dungeon crawl game. If you're not interested in that idea, it's not fun. But there's tons of really interesting story elements that go along. There's character manipulation that you get to do, just like in a role-playing game. And there are just a bunch of options that allow you to really make the game your own. Well, it occurs to me that I've done most of my walk now, and I haven't really talked about what I like or don't like about it at all. Just not ideal. But I had 4 things I wanted to call out about the game, things that are interesting about it. First is this idea of growth. Like a role-playing game, your character gains experience and you get to make changes to what your character can do. Like a good role-playing game, it's built with a variety of things you can do that actually make the experience of your character different. They make it deeper. Like my character, I've put in a few cards that use the wind magic, so then when I've had the opportunity to, I use my optional things to amplify my use of wind magic. So it allows me to customize my play experience to fit my interests and temperament. Gloomhaven has really interesting narration. Before and after each adventure that your characters go on that's outside of the city of Gloomhaven, you get to draw these road cards, which have events that happen while you're traveling to and from the locations where you're playing. These road cards usually result in some sort of decision. You decide to do something, and then as a result, something happens. You gain or lose something. Sometimes you'll start an adventure poisoned or wounded because you chose badly. Other times you'll start with a blessing or a curse. You may gain gold or lose gold. You may gain reputation or lose reputation. But no matter what, it makes the world feel lived in, because on your way to the adventure, stuff happens as well. Some of the cards actually have carryover, so you can sometimes run into cards you've encountered before. That hasn't happened to us too much, but it can. As I said, the gameplay itself is mostly tactical, by which I mean the decisions you make in the gameplay that you're doing is entirely focused in the moment and in the sort of session you're in, and your long-term strategy is much less necessary. Although it does provide a couple things that make long-term strategy part of what you're doing even in the moment. Every character has a lifetime goal that you're seeking for, and when you accomplish that lifetime goal, then you get to retire the character and something new happens in the game. And that's very exciting. And you get to open up new characters and start a new character and so on. So your lifetime goal is something you're always sort of striving for. And the idea is it's supposed to be a secret, like your teammates don't know exactly what that goal is. But otherwise, the decisions you make as you're playing are mostly focused around the specific situation you find yourself in. The enemies that are around you, the level of health of your friends. Like for instance, the last one we played, my daughter has a character who really does a lot of damage up close, but also isn't super strong. And so in our last adventure, she kind of was really excited to use one of her new cards, and she ran up, but she kind of forgot that she moves early and the rest of us moved late, or I was moving late. And so she ran up, and before I could come up to take some of that abuse, she got attacked by all 3 of the enemies, and she ended up losing like all but 1 of her hit points or something. So then I had to change my strategy because I had not been planning on running up, but instead I switched how I was using my cards, and I ran up and I healed her for 2. But more importantly, I went up and kind of got in front of her so that I would be the target the next time the enemy is attacked. Such is the game tactical. The last thing I'd say about it, and it's hard to say why exactly, because that gameplay is really interesting, but it's the really deep connection between the gameplay experience, the legacy components like adding stickers to the board. I didn't even talk about stickers, or getting to add experience to your character. Those sorts of things really create a compelling narrative that brings you back to the game session after session. And it's really a big part of what's made Gloomhaven compelling for us. I will say we also have done a bit to soften the game a little bit for us. We like playing on the easy mode, but it's still sometimes a little harder than we like. So usually, we don't always play this way, but one of the main things we do is everybody gets one mulligan, where you get to take back a decision that you made each adventure. And that has really helped in terms of just letting us think through things a little bit. We don't usually do that past like a card being flipped, but sort of like, oh, I meant to play this card instead of that one. We're usually pretty gentle about that with ourselves, because the whole point is to have fun. And if we're so strict with the rules that we don't have fun, then that's not fun either. So I'd be interested to hear from you. Are you playing Gloomhaven? What character are you playing? What's your favorite thing about it? Pop over to BoardGameGeek Guild 3269 and let us know. Let me know what else did I miss? Why do people care so much about Gloomhaven? What's that thing that's making it so popular? That's about it for me. Hopefully this message from the deep was interesting. It ended up being more about how Gloomhaven works than about what I like about it, but hopefully it was edifying nonetheless. Thanks for joining me today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.